Its recent successful moon landing, India's space agency has launched a rocket to study the sun. It's the country's first such mission, which aims to study solar winds that can cause disturbances on Earth, commonly seen as auroras. Scientists clapped during the Indian Space Research Organisation's live broadcast as a rocket left a trail of smoke and fire in its wake on Saturday. India's space agency later said on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, that the satellite was now in orbit. Named after the Hindi word for the sun, the Aditya L1 spacecraft took flight barely a week after India beat Russia to become the first country to land on the south pole of the moon. While Russia had a more powerful rocket, India's Chandrayaan-3 out-endured the Luna 25 to execute a textbook landing. The Aditya L1 is designed to travel 930,000 miles over 4 months, far short of the Sun, which is around 93 million miles from Earth. It's meant to stop its journey in a kind of parking lot in space called a Lagrange Point. Objects tend to stay put there because of balancing gravitational forces, which reduce a spacecraft's fuel consumption. Scientists hope to learn more about the effects of solar radiation on the thousands of satellites in orbit. ISRO scientists also say that longer-term data from the mission could help better understand the sun's impact on Earth's climate patterns and the origins of solar wind, the stream of particles that flow from the sun through the solar system. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is pushing for India's space missions to play a larger role on a world stage dominated by the United States and China. The country has privatized space launches and is looking to open the sector to foreign investment as it targets a 5-fold increase in its share of the global launch market within the next decade.
3, 2, 1 blast off for India's Aditya L1 rocket, which set off on Saturday afternoon on a 4-month journey to observe the sun's outermost layers.
It makes us feel very proud. I think this is going to be one more step towards how ISRO is kind of expanding and evolving.
And ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, is indeed evolving. Just weeks ago, it became the first country to land on the lunar South Pole. And if its latest launch is successful, India will be the first Asian nation to enter the solar orbit. Aditya is set to circle around the Earth before heading to L1, a sweet spot between the Sun and Earth where gravitational forces cancel each other out, allowing the rocket to orbit. Among other things, the rocket will help gather information about a phenomenon called coronal mass injections, which have the power to disrupt satellites.
This mission in particular I find incredibly inspiring and one that will hopefully alert us to be able to protect our satellites.
But beyond the science, the launch is a huge source of pride for the thousands who showed up for it.
We are privileged to be an Indian and witness this kind of developmental activities.
And it seems to be only the beginning for ISRO, which has several other missions on the horizon in the years ahead. Priyanka Navani, TRT World.
2, 1, 0. Plus 5 seconds. Lift off normal. You are tracking? PC tracking.
Magnificent lift-off of PSLV C-57 with Aditya L1 on board.
Plus 15 seconds.
PSLV C-57 का सफल उत्थापन और इसके साथ 20 सेकंड प्रथम भारतीय सौर अंतरिक्ष यान निकल चुका है सूर्य के तेज से विज्ञान को प्रकाश करने.
Speak to Leo Enright, a space commentator and a broadcaster. Leo, great to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, so the Aditya L1 has a long journey ahead of it. It stops, about 1% of the distance between the Earth and the Sun? And then what does it do? By the way, it's going around the Sun, not around the Earth. Is that right?
Okay, so the L1 position, the Lagrange Point, is used by several spacefaring nations to position spacecraft so that they're above the Earth, but between the Earth and the Sun permanently, so they see the Sun all the time, but can talk to the Earth all the time as well. This is a unique position in space, very, very difficult to achieve an orbit in this position. And the fact that India are on their way, it will take them some months, but the fact that India are on their way is an extraordinary achievement by this newly asserting itself space nation.
Well, yeah, I mean, India's been busy, hasn't it? It's only 10 days since it got a rover onto near the south pole of the moon. Also, the program, I gather, is extremely economical by, say, NASA standards, so they're doing well there. Is this all about prestige or science, or both?
I think it's both, and also economic, because there is a strong pressure on countries now to understand the sun much better than we have in the past because of its influence on what we call space assets. That is, satellites in orbit around the Earth and on their way to the moon and Mars are affected constantly by the sun. The Indian space program likes to talk about the angry sun. That is the sun when it has huge explosions on its surface that send vast amounts of energy out towards the Earth. This can damage satellites, including Indian satellites, and they want that spacecraft out there to warn them about the dangers of these, what we call solar storms.
Now, the Indians have got, 50 satellites up there already. There are tens of thousands of international satellites, one way or the other, orbiting the Earth, all having different purposes. But this business of sending data back, I understand what you're saying about the warnings of the sun's behavior, but these satellites also send back information that's beneficial to the economy, to agriculture, to understanding the prevarications of weather on Earth as well, aren't they?
Absolutely. And in fact, the whole basis, the whole rationale for India's space program at the beginning was communications because of the vast size of the country, and weather, most importantly, because of the typhoons, particularly in the Bay of Bengal. The Indian space program has saved millions of lives over the decades since they began launching weather satellites. And as you say, also the cost. The Americans and the Europeans typically might spend up to $1.5 billion sending a spacecraft to one of these Lagrange points. India just spent 50 million.
Another project still in the offing is to put live astronauts into orbit, which India hasn't done so far. Is that likely to happen soon?
It's definitely in their plans, and every success with these very, very complex deep space missions to the moon and now way beyond the moon, 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth, these all increase the confidence of India's space planners as they look towards launching women and men into space sometime towards the end of this decade.
I mean, briefly, Leo, is India setting an example here about how to do things more efficiently and more cheaply, and pointing to NASA absentmindedly and saying you guys waste a lot of money?
Well, absolutely. India is demonstrating to many smaller countries, developing countries at any rate, that in fact space is not the bailiwick only of the superpowers. This is now something that every country needs to be involved in for their own good, for their citizens. And India has demonstrated that it can be done without breaking the bank.
Splendid. Leo, thanks very much indeed. Leo N right there. Thanks for joining us.
2, 1, 0.
A successful blast-off for India's first ever solar mission on a voyage to decode the mysteries of our closest star. The craft, called Aditya L1, meaning the sun in Hindi, now traveling to the observation point 1.5 million kilometers away.
The Aditya L1 will take its journey after some Earth maneuvers. It will start its journey to the L1 point, very long journey of almost 125 days. So let us wish all the very best to Aditya spacecraft.
The craft will study solar winds, which can disturb the Earth's communication satellites, and examine just how the sun impacts on the Earth's climate patterns. Fresh off another launch just 10 days ago, when India became the first nation ever to land a spacecraft on the moon's southern region. A point of pride for India's Prime Minister and for those watching the launch today.
These 17,000 scientists are doing their best jobs and to lifting India.
Privileged to be an Indian and witness this kind of developmental activities on the Space Center for India.
Aditya L1 satellite separated.
A country spending just a fraction of what the US and China invest in space exploration, but punching well above its weight.
India has had a plan and a strategy that is going to, get a seat at the top table with these major spacefaring nations, and they have been very successful, as you say. So they've picked key challenges and really decided where they can make a difference and really contribute on the international stage.
A stage that now eagerly awaits what this solar mission might uncover. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Well, NASA has discovered a new crater on the moon. The finding was made by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter by comparing before and after images. The cause of the new crater is likely from a Russian spacecraft which crashed a fortnight ago. The location is about 400 kilometres from the spacecraft's intended landing spot. Joining me now live for more on this is astrophysicist and cosmologist at ANU, Brad Tucker. Brad, good afternoon. Just how big is this crater?
Yeah, look, it kind of puts it into scale, kind of the impact altogether. When the Russian Luna 25 probe had this malfunction, its altitude control system essentially had a burst of thrust about 1.5 times bigger. It was supposed to burn or go towards the surface for 84 seconds, went for 127 seconds and had too much. And so this crater is over 100 meters wide. It's actually a fairly large impact site. And so the fact that you can so easily spot the difference from previous images of the same area really just goes to show how hard it hits. And, we've talked about this in the framing of this new moon race. It still is hard to do things. We haven't sent actually that many missions to the moon. Put this in a scale. There's only been maybe about 150 or so missions ever sent to the moon, not just humans, but probes and rovers and satellites. If you put that to scale to Sydney Airport has 800 flights a day. So, the going to the moon is still a young thing. It's still hard. And as you see, the consequences can be dire.
Yeah, and every country is trying to figure it out. So that's very clear. Now, speaking of the moon, we know that a week ago, India set down a robotic probe and it became, I believe, the first country to land near the lunar South Pole. It's been hard at work, I've read online, Brad. So what has it discovered so far?
That's right, yeah. India was the first to get to that lunar South Pole, that same intended region Luna 25 was. So this rover has been on the surface, for about 8 or 9 days now. It has the rest of this week, essentially, or into mid-next week, before the sun will disappear and the solar panels will run out. So it's been really studying the composition of the rocks. Now, this has been the goal, is what are the compositions of the soil, the lunar regolith, as we say, and the rocks near these craters that it's landed at? Now, it's found a lot of the things that it's found previously in terms of other moon exploration missions in the Apollo era. But what it's also found is that it's actually some of these rocks are rich in silicon. Now, this is important. Silicon is actually quite a big aspect to potentially building materials when we talk about the moon. It also means those rocks are similar, even more so, to what we see here on Earth. They've confirmed that there is indeed a lot of oxygen in the ground as well. Now, that's one of the key things it's trying to quantify. We've known the oxygen has been there. How much of it is there? That's been one of those big goals. So it's found that as well. So it's really just pouring through as much data as it possibly can. Now, as I said, it's going to eventually run out of solar power. So it's sending that data to the the orbiter around the moon, Chandrayaan-2. That's going to store it on board and transmit it over time to Earth. So the data is only now just beginning.
And we've just got some live pictures right now, Brad, on our screen of India's next mission. It has launched a study to the sun. So these are live pictures that we're just getting into the newsroom right now. Tell us about this mission.
Yeah, look, we were just, as he talked about, showing the success of India's first mission landing on the moon. And now, this new mission is headed to the sun. So the Aditya L1 mission is going to be in orbit around the sun. As we were just seeing, here's the animation and before the actual launch of the rocket with the satellite on board. What this satellite is going to do is going to be put into orbit around the sun to study what we call the solar wind. This is the activity that we see coming off the sun. This solar wind blows through space and actually affects us here on Earth. It produces things like the aurora australis or borealis that it can affect. But it can also create interference in electrical systems, satellites. It can even affect electrical grids. If you get a big enough storms from the sun, as we've seen in the past, it can actually cause interference in electricity. So there's a huge goal in a lot of countries studying the sun to essentially do solar weather, to do this prediction and understand how does it originate and predict how it originates. And this is, when we talk about India and their growing role in space, previously, it would take months between these sorts of missions. They had one landing on the moon 2 weeks ago. They've been having their rover operating, and now they're already focused on their next one to the sun. It just goes to show how advanced and powerful India is in space.
Yeah, a genuine player in the space world. It's incredible. So I'm glad we got those live pictures on our screen just as we were coming to that question, Brad. So good timing. Now let's move on, because the first space station crew with 4 astronauts from 4 different countries has docked at the space station. What are they doing?
Yeah, so this was quite nice. So earlier this week, the Crew 7, so this was SpaceX's mission for NASA of sending the next batches of astronauts. Now, they'll be spending 6 months doing a variety of experiments based on the country or group they're flying under. But as you said, for the first time, we've actually had 4 of them, and all are from different countries. So normally when we get a batch of astronauts that go up, you have 1 American and 1 Russian, because there's the American side and the Russian side. They had, as well as the American and the Russian, a Japanese astronaut, as well as a European astronaut. So you had 4 different, essentially, space agencies on this mission working for the next 6 months together. And so each of those groups or people will do their own experiments and their own work. And so I think this is kind of the exciting aspect we're seeing in this new space race, is that we still find ways of working together even during heightened political tensions here on Earth, and just how many countries are involved. We were just talking about India's success, and we're watching India's rocket head to the sun right now, but we've also really seeing those different countries playing their own goals and experiments, even the smaller ones, so to speak, on the International Space Station. So, really in the past 2 weeks, we've just seen clearly how much space is evolving.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And, every week we chat, Brad, something different is happening. So there's never a dull moment in the space
That's
world.
right.
Unfortunately, though, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
After its recent successful moon landing, India's space agency has launched a rocket to study the sun. It's the country's first such mission, which aims to study solar winds that can cause disturbances on Earth, commonly seen as auroras. Scientists clapped during the Indian Space Research Organisation's live broadcast as a rocket left a trail of smoke and fire in its wake on Saturday. India's space agency later said on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, that the satellite was now in orbit. Named after the Hindi word for the sun, the Aditya L1 spacecraft took flight barely a week after India beat Russia to become the first country to land on the south pole of the moon. While Russia had a more powerful rocket, India's Chandrayaan-3 out-endured the Luna 25 to execute a textbook landing. The Aditya L1 is designed to travel 930,000 miles over 4 months, far short of the sun, which is around 93 million miles from Earth. It's meant to stop its journey in a kind of parking lot in space called a Lagrange Point. Objects tend to stay put there because of balancing gravitational forces, which reduce a spacecraft's fuel consumption. Scientists hope to learn more about the effects of solar radiation on the thousands of satellites in orbit. ISRO scientists also say that longer-term data from the mission could help better understand the sun's impact on Earth's climate patterns and the origins of solar wind, the stream of particles that flow from the sun through the solar system. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is pushing for India's space missions to play a larger role on a world stage dominated by the United States and China. The country has privatised space launches and is looking to open the sector to foreign investment as it targets a five-fold increase in its share of the global launch market within the next decade.
An Indian rocket has begun a 4-month journey towards the sun. The rocket will study solar winds, which can cause disturbances here on Earth. The mission follows India's successful moon landing last week.
3, 2, 1, 0.
A successful blast-off for India's first ever solar mission on a voyage to decode the mysteries of our closest star. The craft, called Aditya L1, meaning the sun in Hindi, now travelling to the observation point 1.5 million kilometres away.
The Aditya L1 will take its journey after some Earth maneuvers. It will start its journey to the L1 point, very long journey of almost 125 days. So let us wish all the very best to Aditya spacecraft.
The craft will study solar winds, which can disturb the Earth's communication satellites, and examine just how the sun impacts on the Earth's climate patterns. An ambitious task for an ambitious space program. Fresh off another launch just 10 days ago, when India became the first nation ever to land a spacecraft on the moon's southern region. A point of pride for India's Prime Minister and for those watching the launch today.
These 17,000 scientists are doing their best jobs and to lifting India.
Privileged to be an Indian and witness this kind of developmental activities on the Space Center for India.
Aditya L1 satellite separated.
A country spending just a fraction of what the US and China invest in space exploration, but punching well above its weight.
India has had a plan and a strategy that is going to, get a seat at the top table with these major spacefaring nations, and they have been very successful, as you say. So they've picked key challenges and really decided where they can make a difference and really contribute on the international stage.
A stage that now eagerly awaits what this solar mission might uncover. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
2, 1, 0.
Blast off for India's latest space mission. Launched from the eastern coast of the Indian island of Sriharikota, Aditya L1 is off on a 1.5 million kilometre quest to study the sun's outer layers.
And we have a confirmation of Aditya L1 separation. The mission has been accomplished.
And with that, some relief for scientists at the ground control of the Indian Space Research Organisation, or ISRO. The craft is heading for Lagrange Point 1, also known as L1, where the gravity of the Earth and Sun are balanced.
The Aditya L1 will take its journey after some Earth maneuvers. It will start its journey to the L1 point, very long journey of almost 125 days. So let us wish all the very best to Aditya spacecraft.
ISRO says the orbiter's specialized instruments will study the 3 outer layers of the sun.
We are going to get the complete picture. If I put in a layman terms, it's like we are going to get the black and white image, the colored image, and the high definition image, 4K image of the sun, so that we don't miss out on anything that's happening on the sun.
Scientists say the probe could also shed light on solar weather.
An objective, a science goal of trying to understand the activity of the sun, in particular how that shows itself as solar flares and more extreme events called coronal mass ejections. We're more and more reliant on satellites for our day-to-day lives, and particularly strong solar activity can actually affect some of those satellites that we rely on.
It's been just over a week since India carried out its first landing of a rover near the moon's south pole. It's only the 4th country to successfully carry out a lunar landing. And this latest success is propelling India into becoming one of the leading players in outer space.